Ethnography is the systematic study of people and cultures. It is designed to explore cultural phenomena where the researcher observes society from the point of view of the subject of the study. An ethnography is a means to represent graphically and in writing the culture of a group. The word can thus be said to have a double meaning, which partly depends on whether it is used as a count noun or uncountably. The resulting field study or a case report reflects the knowledge and the system of meanings in the lives of a cultural group. Ethnography, as the empirical data on human societies and cultures, was pioneered in the biological, social, and cultural branches of anthropology but has also become popular in the social sciences in general, Eurosociology, communication studies, Historia Euro, wherever people study ethnic groups, formations, compositions, resettlements, social welfare characteristics, materiality, spirituality, and a people's ethnogenesis. The typical ethnography is a holistic study and so includes a brief history, and an analysis of the terrain, the climate, and the habitat. In all cases it should be reflexive, make a substantial contribution toward the understanding of the social life of humans, have an aesthetic impact on the reader, and express a credible reality. An ethnography records all observed behavior and describes all symbol-meaning relations using concepts that avoid casual explanations. Origins: Gerard Friedrich Marwan Courtelet developed the concept of ethnography as a separate discipline whilst participating in the second Kamchatka expedition as a professor of history and geography. Whilst involved in the expedition, he differentiated var paragraph Lker Beshrabung as a distinct area of study. This then became known as ethnography. However, it was August Ludwig von Paragraphser and Christoph Wilhelm Jacob Gatterer of the University of Gar-Paragraph-Tingen who introduced the term into academic discourse in an attempt to reform the contemporary understanding of world history. Data collection methods. Data collection methods are meant to capture the social meanings and ordinary activities of people in naturally occurring settings that are commonly referred to as the field. The goal is to collect data in such a way that the researcher imposes a minimal amount of their own bias on the data. Multiple methods of data collection may be employed to facilitate a relationship that allows for a more personal and in-depth portrait of the informants and their community. These can include participant observation, field notes, interviews, and surveys. Interviews are often taped and later transcribed, allowing the interview to proceed unimpaired of note-taking, but with all information available later for full analysis. Secondary research and document analysis are also employed to provide insight into the research topic. In the past, kinship charts were commonly used to discover logical patterns and social structure in non-Western societies. However, anthropology today focuses more on the study of urban settings and the use of kinship charts is seldom employed. In order to make the data collection and interpretation transparent, researchers creating ethnographies often attempt to be reflexive. Reflexivity refers to the researcher's aim to explore the ways in which the researcher's involvement with a particular study influences, acts upon and informs such research. Despite these attempts of reflexivity, no researcher can be totally unbiased, which has provided a basis to criticize ethnography. Traditionally, the ethnographer focuses attention on a community, selecting knowledgeable informants who know the activities of the community well. These informants are typically asked to identify other informants who represent the community, often using chain sampling. This process is often effective in revealing common cultural denominators connected to the topic being studied. Ethnography relies greatly on up-close, personal experience. Participation, rather than just observation, is one of the keys to this process. Ethnography is very useful in social research. I'll examine the ontological and epistemological presuppositions underlying ethnography. Ethnographic research can range from a realist perspective in which behavior is observed to a constructivist perspective where understanding is socially constructed by the researcher and subjects. Research can range from an objectivist account of fixed, observable behaviors to an interpretivist narrative describing a Euro-OAth interplay of individual agency and social structure. Critical theory researchers address a Euro issues of power within the researcher-researched relationships and the links between knowledge and power. Differences across disciplines. The ethnographic method is used across a range of different disciplines, primarily by anthropologists but also occasionally by sociologists. Cultural studies, sociology, economics, social work, education, ethnomusicology, folklore, religious studies, geography, history, linguistics, communication studies, performance studies, advertising, psychology, usability, political science, and criminology are other fields which have made use of ethnography. Cultural and social anthropology. Cultural anthropology and social anthropology were developed around ethnographic research and their canonical texts which are mostly ethnographies, for example Argonauts of the Western Pacific by Bronisław Malinowski, Ethnologisch Excursion in Johor by Nicholas Maclay, Coming of Age in Samoa by Margaret Mead, The New by E. Evans Pritchard, Navan by Gregory Bateson or The Leal of the Kasai by Mary Douglas. Cultural and social anthropologists today place such a high value on actually doing ethnographic research that ethnologia the comparative synthesis of ethnographic information is rarely the foundation for a career. The typical ethnography is a document written about a particular people, almost always based at least in part on emic views of where the culture begins and ends. Using language or community boundaries to bound the ethnography is common. Ethnographies are also sometimes called case studies. Ethnographers study and interpret culture, its universalities and its variations through ethnographic study based on fieldwork. An ethnography is a specific kind of written observational science which provides an account of a particular culture, society, or community. The field work usually involves spending a year or more in another society, living with the local people and learning about their ways of life. Ethnographers are participant observers. They take part in events they study because it helps with understanding local behavior and thought. Classic examples are Carol Stack's All Our Kin, Jean Briggs' Never in Anger, Richard Lee's Kalahari Hunter-Gatherers, Victor Turner's Forest of Symbols, David Mabry Lewis' Shavanti Society, E. Evans Pritchard's The New, and Claude La Copyright by Strauss Trist's Tropics. Iterations of ethnographic representations in the classic, modernist camp include Bartholomew Dean's recent contribution, Yura in a Society, Cosmology, and History in Peruvian Amazonia. A typical ethnography attempts to be holistic and typically follows an outline to include a brief history of the culture in question, an analysis of the physical geography or terrain inhabited by the people under study, including climate, and often including what biological anthropologists call habitat. Folk notions of botany and zoology are presented as ethnobotany and ethnozoology alongside references from the formal sciences. Material culture, technology, and means of subsistence are usually treated next, as they are typically bound up in physical geography and include descriptions of infrastructure. Kinship and social structure are typically included. Languages spoken, dialects, and the history of language change are another group of standard topics. Practices of child rearing, acculturation, and emic views on personality and values usually follow after sections on social structure. Rites, rituals, and other evidence of religion have long been in interest and are sometimes central to ethnographies, especially when conducted in public where visiting anthropologists can see them. As ethnography developed, anthropologists grew more interested in less tangible aspects of culture, such as values, worldview and what Clifford Geertz termed the ethos of the culture. Geertz's own fieldwork used elements of a phenomenological approach to fieldwork, tracing not just the doings of people, but the cultural elements themselves. For example, if within a group of people, winking was a communicative gesture, he sought to first determine what kinds of things a wink might mean. Then, he sought to determine in what contexts winks were used, and whether, as one moved about a region, winks remained meaningful in the same way. In this way, cultural boundaries of communication could be explored, as opposed to using linguistic boundaries or notions about residence. Geertz, while still following something of a traditional ethnographic outline, moved outside that outline to talk about webs instead of outlines of culture. Within cultural anthropology, there are several subgenres of ethnography. Beginning in the 1950s and early 1960s, anthropologists began writing bioconfessional ethnographies that intentionally exposed the nature of ethnographic research. Famous examples include Trist's Tropics by Claude La, copyright by Strauss, The High Valley by Kenneth Reed, and The Savage and the Innocent by David Maybury Lewis, as well as the mildly fictionalized Return to Laughter by Eleanor Smith Bowen. Later reflexive ethnographies refined the technique to translate cultural differences by representing their effects on the ethnographer. Famous examples include Deep Play, Notes on a Balinese Cockfight by Clifford Geertz, Reflections on Fieldwork in Morocco by Paul Rabinow, The Headman and I by Jean-Paul Dumont, and Tuhami by Vincent Crapanzano. In the 1980s, the rhetoric of ethnography was subjected to intense scrutiny within the discipline, under the general influence of literary theory and post-colonial post-structuralist thought. Experimental ethnographies that reveal the ferment of the discipline include Shamanism, Colonialism, and The Wild Man by Michael Taussig, Debating Muslims by Michael F. J. Fisher and Media Beedi, A Space on the Side of the Road by Kathleen Stewart, and Advocacy After Bhopal by Kim Fortun. This critical turn in sociocultural anthropology during the mid-1980s can be traced to the influence of the now classic text, Writing Culture, The Poetics and Politics of Ethnography, edited by James Clifford and George Marcus. Writing Culture helped bring changes to both anthropology and ethnography, often described in terms of being postmodern, reflexive, literary, deconstructive, or post-structural in nature, in that the text helped to highlight the various epistemic and political predicaments that many practitioners saw as plaguing ethnographic representations and practices. Where Geertz's and Turner's interpretive anthropology recognized subjects as creative actors who constructed their sociocultural worlds out of symbols, postmodernists attempted to draw attention to the privileged status of the ethnographers themselves. That is, the ethnographer cannot escape their own particular viewpoint in creating an ethnographic account, thus making any claims of objective neutrality on the part of their representation highly problematic, if not altogether impossible. In regards to this last point, writing culture became a focal point for looking at how ethnographers could describe different cultures and societies without denying the subjectivity of those individuals and groups being studied, while simultaneously doing so without laying claim to absolute knowledge and objective authority. Along with the development of experimental forms such as dialogic anthropology, narrative ethnography, and literary ethnography, writing culture helped to encourage the development of collaborative ethnography. This exploration of the relationship between writer, audience, and subject has become a central tenet of contemporary anthropological and ethnographic practice, where an active collaboration between the researcher, S, and subject, S, has helped blend, in certain instances, the practice of collaboration in ethnographic fieldwork with the process of creating the actual ethnographic product that emerges from the research itself. Sociology is another field which prominently features ethnographies. Urban sociology and the Chicago School in particular are associated with ethnographic research, with some well-known early examples being Street Corner Society by William Footwhite and Black Metropolis by St. Clair Drake and Horace R. Caton, Jr. Some of the influence for this can be traced to the anthropologist Lloyd Warner, who was on the Chicago sociology faculty, and to Robert Park's experience as a journalist. Symbolic interactionism developed from the same tradition and yielded several excellent sociological ethnographies, including Shared Fantasy by Gary Allen Fine, which documents the early history of fantasy role-playing games. Other important ethnographies in sociology include Pierre Bourdieu's work on Algeria and France. Jabir F. Gubrium's series of organizational ethnographies focused on the everyday practices of illness, care, and recovery are notable. They include Living and Dying at Murray Manor, which describes the social worlds of a nursing home. Describing Care, Image and Practice in Rehabilitation, which documents the social organization of patient subjectivity in a physical rehabilitation hospital. Caretakers, Treating Emotionally Disturbed Children, which features the social construction of behavioral disorders in children. And Old-Timers and Alzheimer's, the descriptive organization of senility, which describes how the Alzheimer's disease movement constructed a new subjectivity of senile dementia and how that is organized in a geriatric hospital. Paul Willis's Learning to Labor on Working Class Youth, the work of Elijah Anderson, Mitchell Dunayer, and Lo C. Waquant on Black America, and Leila Rhodes' Glimpses of Madrasa from Africa. But even though many subfields and theoretical perspectives within sociology use ethnographic methods, ethnography is not the sine qua non of the discipline, as it is in cultural anthropology. Communication studies, beginning in the 1960s and 1970s, ethnographic research methods began to be widely employed by communications scholars. The purpose of ethnography is to describe and interpret the shared and learned patterns of values, behaviors, beliefs and language of a culture-sharing group. Also, Agar notes that ethnography is both a process and an outcome of the research. Studies such as Jerry Philipson's analysis of cultural communication strategies in a blue-collar, working-class neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, Speaking Like a Man in Teamsterville, paved the way for the expansion of ethnographic research in the study of communication. Scholars of communication studies use ethnographic research methods to analyze communicative behaviors and phenomena. This is often characterized in the writing as attempts to understand taken-for-granted routines by which working definitions are socially produced. Ethnography as a method is a storied, careful, and systematic examination of the reality-generating mechanisms of everyday life. Ethnographic work in communication studies seeks to explain how ordinary methods performances construct the ordinary actions used by ordinary people in the accomplishments of their identities. This often gives the perception of trying to answer the why and how come questions of human communication. Often this type of research results in a case study or field study, such as an analysis of speech patterns at a protest rally, or the way firemen communicate during downtime at a fire station. Like anthropology scholars, communication scholars often immerse themselves, participate in and/or directly observe the particular social group being studied. Other fields, the American anthropologist George Spindler was a pioneer in applying ethnographic methodology to the classroom. Anthropologists like Daniel Miller and Mary Douglas have used ethnographic data to answer academic questions about consumers and consumption. In this sense, Tony Salvador, Genevieve Bell, and Ken Anderson described design ethnography as being a way of understanding the particulars of daily life in such a way as to increase the success probability of a new product or service or, more appropriately, to reduce the probability of failure specifically due to a lack of understanding of the basic behaviors and frameworks of consumers. Sociologist Sam Ladner argues in her book that understanding consumers and their desires requires a shift in standpoint, one that only ethnography provides. The result is products and services that truly answer consumers' unmet needs. Businesses, too, have found ethnographers helpful for understanding how people use products and services, as indicated in the increasing use of ethnographic methods to understand consumers and consumption, or for new product development. The recent ethnographic praxis in industry conference is evidence of this. Ethnographers' systematic and holistic approach to real-life experience is valued by product developers, who use the method to understand unstated desires or cultural practices that surround products. Where focus groups fail to inform marketers about what people really do, ethnography links what people say to what they actually do, avoiding the pitfalls that come from relying only on self-reported, focus group data. Evaluating ethnography. Ethnographic methodology is not usually evaluated in terms of philosophical standpoint. Ethnographic studies nonetheless need to be evaluated in some manner. While there is no consensus on evaluation standards, Richardson provides 5 criteria that ethnographers might find helpful. Jabber F. Gubrium and James A. Holstein's monograph The New Language of Qualitative Method discusses forms of ethnography in terms of their methods. Talk. Substantive contribution. Does the piece contribute to our understanding of social life? Aesthetic merit. Does this piece succeed aesthetically? Reflexivity. How did the author come to write this text? Is there adequate self-awareness and self-exposure for the reader to make judgments about the point of view? Impact. Does this affect me? Emotionally? Intellectually? Does it move me? Expresses a reality. Does it seem true? A credible account of a cultural, social, individual, or communal sense of the real? Ethics. Gary Allen Fine argues that the nature of ethnographic inquiry demands that researchers deviate from formal and idealistic rules or ethics that have come to be widely accepted in qualitative and quantitative approaches in research. Many of these ethical assumptions are rooted in positivist and post-positivist epistemologies that have adapted over time, but nonetheless are apparent and must be accounted for in all research paradigms. These ethical dilemmas are evident throughout the entire process of conducting ethnographies, including the design, implementation, and reporting of an ethnographic study. Essentially, Fine maintains that researchers are typically not as ethical as they claim or assume to be and that each job includes ways of doing things that would be inappropriate for others to know. Fine is not necessarily casting blame or pointing his finger at ethnographic researchers, but rather is attempting to show that researchers often make idealized ethical claims and standards which in actuality are inherently based on partial truths and self-deceptions. Fine also acknowledges that many of these partial truths and self-deceptions are unavoidable. He maintains that illusions are essential to maintain an occupational reputation and avoid potentially more caustic consequences. He claims, ethnographers cannot help but lie, but in lying, we reveal truths that escape those who are not so bold. Based on these assertions, Fine establishes three conceptual clusters in which ethnographic ethical dilemmas can be situated: classic virtues, technical skills, and ethnographic self. Much debate surrounding the issue of ethics arose after the ethnographer Napoleon Chafnon conducted his ethnographic fieldwork with the Yanomami people of South America. While there is no international standard on ethnographic ethics, many Western anthropologists look to the American Anthropological Association for guidance when conducting ethnographic work. The association has generated a code of ethics approved in February 2009 which states that anthropologists have moral obligations as members of other groups, such as the family, religion, and community, as well as the profession. The Code of Ethics goes on to note that anthropologists are also part of a wider scholarly and political network as well as human and natural environment which needs to be reported on respectfully. The Code of Ethics recognizes that sometimes very close and personal relationship can sometimes emerge from doing ethnographic work. The American Anthropological Association does recognize that the code is a bit limited in scope mainly because doing ethnographic work can sometimes be multidisciplinary and anthropologists need to familiarize themselves with ethic not only from an anthropological perspective but also from the perspectives of other disciplines. The 8-page Code of Ethics outlines ethical considerations for those conducting research, teaching, application and dissemination of results which are briefly outlined below. Conducting research. When conducting research, anthropologists need to be aware of the potential impacts of the research on the people and animals they study. If the seeking of new knowledge will negatively impact the people and animals they will be studying, they may not undertake the study according to the Code of Ethics. Teaching. When teaching the discipline of anthropology, instructors are required to inform students of the ethical dilemmas of conducting ethnographies and field work. Application. When conducting an ethnography, anthropologists must be open with funders, colleagues, persons studied or providing information, and relevant parties affected by the work about the purpose, potential impacts, and source, of support for the work. Dissemination of results. When disseminating results of an ethnography, the code notes that, anthropologists have an ethical obligation to consider the potential impact of both their research and the communication or dissemination of the results of their research on all directly or indirectly involved. Research results of ethnographies should not be withheld from participants in the research if that research is being observed by other people. Classic virtues. The kindly ethnographer. Most ethnographers present themselves as being more sympathetic than they actually are, which aids in the research process, but is also deceptive. The identity that we present to subjects is different from who we are in other circumstances. The friendly ethnographer. Ethnographers operate under the assumption that they should not dislike anyone. In actuality, when hated individuals are found within research, ethnographers often crop them out of the findings. The honest ethnographer. If research participants know the research goals, their responses will likely be skewed. Therefore, ethnographers often conceal what they know in order to increase the likelihood of acceptance. Technical skills. The precise ethnographer. Ethnographers often create the illusion that field notes are data and reflect what really happened. They engage in the opposite of plagiarism, giving credit to those undeserving by not using precise words but rather loose interpretations and paraphrasing. Researchers take near-fictions and turn them into claims of fact. The closest ethnographers can ever really get to reality is an approximate truth. The observant ethnographer. Readers of ethnography are often led to assume the report of a scene is complete. That little of importance was missed. In reality, an ethnographer will always miss some aspect because they are not omniscient. Everything is open to multiple interpretations and misunderstandings. The ability of the ethnographer to take notes and observe varies, and therefore, what is depicted in ethnography is not the whole picture. The unobtrusive ethnographer. As a participant in the scene, the researcher will always have an effect on the communication that occurs within the research site. The degree to which one is an active member affects the extent to which sympathetic understanding is possible. Ethnographic self. The following appellations are commonly misconceived conceptions of ethnographers: the candid ethnographer. Where the researcher situates themselves within the ethnography is ethically problematic. There is an illusion that everything reported has actually happened because the researcher has been directly exposed to it. The chaste ethnographer. When ethnographers participate within the field, they invariably develop relationships with research subjects participants. These relationships are sometimes not accounted for within the reporting of the ethnography despite the fact that they seemingly would influence the research findings. The fair ethnographer. Fine claims that objectivity is an illusion and that everything in ethnography is known from a perspective. Therefore, it is unethical for a researcher to report fairness in their findings. The literary ethnographer. Representation is a balancing act of determining what to show through poetic prosaic language and style versus what to tell via straightforward, factile. Unregistered trademark reporting. The idiosyncratic skill of the ethnographer influences the face value of the research. According to Norman K. Denzin, the following 8 principles should be considered when observing, recording, and sampling data. The groups should combine symbolic meanings with patterns of interaction. Observe the world from the point of view of the subject, while maintaining the distinction between everyday and scientific perceptions of reality. Link the group symbols and their meanings with the social relationships. Record all behavior. Methodology should highlight phases of process, change, and stability. The act should be a type of symbolic interactionism. Use concepts that would avoid casual explanations. See also, area studies, critical ethnography, ethnography of communication, ethnology, realist ethnography, online ethnography, a form of ethnography that involves conducting ethnographic studies on the Internet, participant observation, video ethnography, living lab, notable ethnographers. References. Further reading, Agar, Michael. The Professional Stranger, An Informal Introduction to Ethnography. Academic Press. Clifford, James and George E. Marcus. Writing Culture, The Poetics and Politics of Ethnography. Berkeley, University of California Press. Douglas, Mary and Baron Isherwood. The World of Goods, Toward an Anthropology of Consumption. Routledge, London. Erickson, Ken C. and Donald D. Steele. Doing Team Ethnographer Warnings and Advice. Sage, Beverly Hills. Fine, G.A. 10 Lies of Ethnography. Journal of Contemporary Ethnography, 22, 3, PA 267-294. Jitz, Clifford. The Interpretation of Cultures. Godsey, Chris. Writing Ethnographies That Ordinary People Can Read. Anthropology News. Gubrium, Jabber F. Analyzing Field Reality. Thousand Oaks, California, Sage. Gubrium, Jabber F. and James A. Holstein. The New Language of Qualitative Method. New York, Oxford University Press. Gubrium, Jabber F. and James A. Holstein. Analyzing Narrative Reality. Thousand Oaks, California, Sage. Heath, Shirley Bryce and Bryan Street, with Molly Mills. On Ethnography. Himes, Dell. Foundations in Sociolinguistics, an ethnographic approach. Philadelphia, University of Pennsylvania Press. Kotak, Conrad Philip Window on Humanity: A Concise Introduction to General Anthropology. McGraw-Hill, New York. Marcus, George E. and Michael Fisher. Anthropology as Cultural Critique, An Experimental Moment in the Human Sciences. Chicago, University of Chicago Press. Moelka, René: Being One of the Guys or the Fly on the Wall? Participant Observation of Veteran Bikers. N.J. Soeters, P. Shields, S. Ryachens. Routledge Handbook of Research Methods in Military Studies, New York, Routledge ppA 104 Euro 114. Miller, Daniel: Material Culture and Mass Consumption. Blackwell, London. Spradley, James P. The Ethnographic Interview. Wadsworth Group, Thompson Learning. Salvador, Tony. Genevieve Bell and Ken Anderson, Design Ethnography. Design Management Journal. Van Marnin, John 1988. Tales of the Field, On Writing Ethnography. Chicago, University of Chicago Press. Westbrook, David A. Navigators of the Contemporary, Why Ethnography Matters. Chicago, University of Chicago Press. External links: Human Relations Area Files, 100 of the Most Influential Ethnographies and Anthropology Texts, Ethnographic Praxis in Industry Conference, Jen Zuck, Michael A. Synthesis of Ethnographic Research, Division of Anthropology, American Museum of Natural History, over 160,000 objects from Pacific, North American, African, Asian ethnographic collections with images and detailed description, linked to the original catalog pages, field notebooks, and photographs are available online. Ross Archive of African Images, ethnographic material collection from Northern Anatolia and Caucasus. Photo Gallery, ethnography.com, a community-based ethnography website for academic and professional ethnographers and interested parties. New Zealand Museum: Images of Objects from Pacific Cultures. University of Pennsylvania's What is Ethnography? Penn's Public Interest Anthropology website, American Ethnography, Definitions, What is Ethnography? A collection of quotes about ethnography, Doing Ethnographies, Cornell University Library. Southeast Asia Visions, Ethnography for the Masses. 2 CV's Practical Application of Ethnography in Market Research, Scott Polar Research Institute. Arctic Material Culture Collection, texts on Wikisource, Otis Tuft and Mason. Ethnography. New International Encyclopedia, Ethnology and Ethnography. Encyclopaedia Britannica 1911, Ethnography. Encyclopedia Americana. 1920, Ethnography. Collier's New Encyclopedia 1921. H. The researcher's involvement with a particular study influences, acts upon and informs such research. Despite these attempts of reflexivity, no researcher can be totally unbiased, which has provided a basis to criticize ethnography. Traditionally, the ethnographer focuses attention on a community, selecting knowledgeable informants who know the activities of the community well. These informants are typically asked to identify other informants who represent the community, often using chain sampling. This process is often effective in revealing common cultural denominators connected to the topic being studied. Ethnography relies greatly on up-close, personal experience. Participation, rather than just observation, is one of the keys to this process. Ethnography is the systematic study of people and cultures. It is designed to explore cultural phenomena where the researcher observes society from the point of view of the subject of the study. An ethnography is a means to represent graphically and in writing the culture of a group. The word can thus be said to have a double meaning, which partly depends on whether it is used as a count noun or uncountably. The resulting field study or a case report reflects the knowledge and the system of meanings in the lives of a cultural group. Ethnography, as the empirical data on human societies and cultures, was pioneered in the biological, social, and cultural branches of anthropology but has also become popular in the social sciences in general. Eurosociology, communication studies, Historia Euro, wherever people study ethnic groups, their community. These can include participant observation, field notes, interviews, and surveys. Interviews are often taped and later transcribed, allowing the interview to proceed unimpaired of note-taking, but with all information available later for full analysis. Secondary research and document analysis are also employed to provide insight into the research topic. In the past, kinship charts were commonly used to discover logical patterns and social structure in non-Western societies. However, anthropology today focuses more on the study of urban settings, and the use of kinship charts is seldom employed. In order to make the data collection and interpretation transparent, researchers creating ethnographies often attempt to be reflexive. Reflexivity refers to the researcher's aim to explore the ways in which formations, compositions, resettlements, social welfare characteristics, materiality, spirituality, and a people's ethnogenesis. The typical ethnography is a holistic study and so includes a brief history, and an analysis of the terrain, the climate, and the habitat. In all cases it should be reflexive, make a substantial contribution toward the understanding of the social life of humans, have an aesthetic impact on the reader, and express a credible reality. An ethnography records all observed behavior and describes all symbol-meaning relations using concepts that avoid casual explanations. Origins: Gerard Friedrich Marwan Courtelet developed the concept of ethnography as a separate discipline whilst participating in the second Kamchatka expedition as a professor of history and geography. Whilst involved in the expedition, he differentiated var paragraph Lker Beshrabung as a distinct area of study. This then became known as ethnography. However, it was August Ludwig von Paragraphser and Christoph Wilhelm Jacob Gatterer of the University of Gar-Paragraph-Tingen who introduced the term into academic discourse in an attempt to reform the contemporary understanding of world history. Data collection methods: data collection methods are meant to capture the social meanings and ordinary activities of people in naturally occurring settings that are commonly referred to as the field. The goal is to collect data in such a way that the researcher imposes a minimal amount of their own bias on the data. Multiple methods of data collection may be employed to facilitate a relationship that allows for a more personal and in-depth portrait of the informants and their